The silent cry of a woman softly echoes down the corridors of the temple at Shiloh, in a time when God's silence seemed to hang heavy over a nation torn between hope and weariness. While everyone around her celebrated with eating and drinking, Hannah immersed herself in prayer, her heart overflowing with a pain unnoticed by many but deeply known to the Lord of hosts. It is through tears and complete surrender that the story of the mother of the prophet Samuel begins to transform Israel's destiny and inspires generations with an example of persevering faith and renewed trust in the God who hears every hidden plea. This is Bible in Colors, the channel that colors the biblical narrative with historical detail, practical application, and living hope for your daily life. As you walk this journey today, you'll discover that God does not forget tears, knows how to write new chapters even in barren settings, and honors those who learn to turn pain into sincere, total surrender in prayer. The challenge is to let Hannah's example illuminate your deserts and cultivate hope where your soul has already stopped dreaming. At a time when Israel suffered political instability and religious confusion, God's eyes turned to a seemingly ordinary woman whose story would prove decisive in changing history's path and blessing generations. Hannah lived in Ramah, a small village in the hills of Ephraim. She was married to Elkanah, a devout and esteemed man, but she bore the bitter stigma of infertility. While her rival Peninnah multiplied children and scorn, Hannah lived with silence, social pressure, and the weight every woman in her culture faced. Bearing children was considered synonymous with honor and purpose. Fragile, but never faithless, Hannah turned her pain into persevering prayer. The biblical text, 1 Samuel 1 and 2, reveals that year after year she journeyed to Shiloh to pray. In that sacred place, while others rejoiced, she poured out her soul before the Lord, asking for a son and promising to dedicate him to divine service. What many saw as weakness, God saw as fertile ground. Hannah's faith was refined not in ease, but in dryness, not in abundance, but in emptiness. This heart, ready to wholly depend on the Lord, became the channel for an answer that would change not only one life, but an entire era in Israel. Hannah understood, perhaps as very few did, that prayer is not only a list of requests, but surrender, silent warfare, wordless tears, and hope against hope. By letting go of the need for conditions and explanations, Hannah made space for God to write a story far greater than she could have imagined. At the temple, her downcast appearance caught the attention of the priest Eli, who at first mistook her for being drunk. But Hannah, head bowed and voice nearly silent, explained, "I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord." Eli, touched by this uncommon sincerity, blessed her prophetically, unaware that he was before a woman chosen to be the mother of one of the Bible's greatest prophets. Hannah, relieved and filled with unexplainable peace, returned home assured that she had been heard. Shortly after Samuel was born, his name meaning "asked of the Lord." Edi, faithful to her vow, Hannah gave the boy to serve in the temple, showing the world that, with faith and a willingness to keep promises, God honors and multiplies fruit beyond all human expectation. Hannah's example resonates to this day, a living invitation to all who carry long waits, unanswered pain, and buried dreams. How many believe God acts only in seasons of abundance or in lives with no wounds? Hannah's story disproves this. It's in the valley of tears, in prolonged silence, and on the hidden altar of the heart that the Lord forms miracles capable of transforming an entire reality. Today, with so many voices competing for quick answers, Hannah offers another rhythm. Perseverance, sincerity, a faith that starts on its knees and ends up impacting generations. What prayer do you carry in your heart and need to present again before God, even without seeing the answer yet? Share in the comments. Our community wants to pray with you, renew hope, and celebrate new beginnings together. When we try to see the context of Hannah's story, we find ourselves in a unique period of the biblical narrative, the time of the judges, a roller coaster of highs and lows marked by political instability, the spiritual distance of the people, and the sense that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Israel was far from the unity and glory it would one day have under King David. It faced constant threats from neighboring peoples and sought direction amid battles, insecurity, and only occasional peace. Shiloh, where Hannah's story begins, was the nation's worship center at the time. There stood the tabernacle, a special tent where the Ark of the Covenant was kept, the ultimate symbol of God's presence among his people. The hills of Ephraim, where Hannah's family lived, combined the landscapes of ancient olive trees with small towns and villages. Their religious customs often shaped by empty rituals and a tendency to forget the Lord's great deeds. In an era when prophets were rare and direct manifestations of God seemed distant, the priesthood at Shiloh was kept by Eli's family. Yet even Eli's sons strayed from God's ways and exploited worship for personal gain, deepening the climate of spiritual disappointment and insecurity among the people. Against this backdrop, Hannah stands out as an apparently invisible but decisive character. Her story shows that God is never indifferent to the suffering of the hidden, the forgotten, or the fragile. Elkanah, her husband, was a Levite from the line of Zuph, a pious man who annually took his family to Shiloh, fulfilling the law of bringing offerings to the Lord. Yet his home, devout as it was not immune to pain and conflict. Elkanah had two wives, a socially tolerated but deeply problematic arrangement. Peninnah, the other wife, gave Elkanah sons and took every chance to mock or wound Hannah, making the burden of her infertility even harder to bear. To be an infertile woman in Hebrew culture at the time was to carry the marks of shame, inadequacy, and powerlessness. Offspring were seen as God's direct blessing, a sign of approval and prosperity. Not having children was, for many, evidence of God's rejection or hidden judgment. Yet Hannah did not surrender to bitterness. Year after year, she went up faithfully to Shiloh, facing stares, criticism, ridicule, and even what seemed like indifference from spiritual leaders. This shows that true faith does not depend on favorable conditions, nor is it limited by circumstances or culture. In Hannah, we see how suffering can mature faith and even give meaning to our deepest laments. Shiloh, far from being a great urban center, was a place of simplicity. Tents and stone huts, cultivated fields, paths where children played and animals grazed. Amid religious festivals, lively with songs and sacrifices, Hannah's loneliness quietly grew. Her plea was not public. She chose personal prayer, away from the spotlight, showing that the essential often happens behind history's scenes. It was a private struggle. Tears, whispers, and hope renewed each year. Eli the priest was respected for his wisdom, but worn out by his son's failures and the people's struggles. Hannah's posture caught his attention, and not in a positive way. A woman praying for a long time, lips moving but no sound. He assumed her drunk, revealing how far even the spiritual authorities of the day had grown from recognizing sincere, genuine faith. This contrast highlights both Hannah's courage and how ritual had overtaken true devotion. The Bible notes that after being misunderstood, Hannah replied, "No, my Lord, I'm a woman with a troubled spirit. I have poured out my soul to the Lord." Eli, moved by her sincerity, blessed her with the hope that her prayer would be granted. This moment became a turning point. The temple's humble space became the scene of a divine intervention, uniting bold prayer, attentive listening, and received blessing. How often do we feel equally out of place today? How many fight unseen battles, bear others' expectations, and struggle to keep faith in cold, formal, or mechanical settings? Hannah's story calls each of us to be authentic before God, to persevere beyond human disregard, and to believe that true spirituality needs neither great platforms nor applause. It was in this context of national crisis and declining faithfulness that Hannah's greatest gift was born, Samuel. His name carried hope, a petition to the Lord. Samuel, dedicated as a Nazirite from birth, was not just an answer to his mother's prayer, but to the longing of a people desperate for leadership and spiritual renewal. Hannah's path to motherhood became a pathway of hope for a nation learning. With her, that God hears the cry of the afflicted, works behind the scenes, and raises up leaders from broken hearts. What questions and insights does this context stir in you? How does Hannah's faith challenge your own perspective on pain, prayer, and keeping faith in challenging environments? In what ways do you sense God is still caring, even if others disregard or doubt? In what area of your life do you feel alone and need to learn from Hannah's perseverance? Share with us. We want to be the family that walks with you and believes God has miracles ready for those who trust, despite the silence. As years went by, Hannah's home became a stage for frustrated expectations, family tension, and small sparks of hope. Elkanah, her husband, lived divided between two realities. On one hand, he showed love and care for Hannah, giving her larger portions during sacrifices at Shiloh. On the other, he maintained life with Peninnah, whose fertility brought him pride, but also rivalry and constant discomfort. Each season, Hannah watched Peninnah's children grow, play around the house, and receive affection from their father. But for Hannah, each festival reopened wounds. After the return from Shiloh, she was left with silence and the persistent ache of emptiness. The biblical narrative highlights the contrast between these two women, one fertile and provocative, the other barren and pouring her soul out before the Lord. Peninnah didn't spare Hannah from mockery. Her words cut deeper than any sword. The social circle confirmed prejudice, as infertility was seen as a curse. Yet Hannah would not retaliate with words. She chose silence, weeping, the secret refuge of prayer. Every hidden tear became a seed of hope, every stored pain raw material for the miracle, which, though unseen, was already growing in God's hands. Elkanah's posture added complexity to the family's dynamic. Marked is his attempt to console Hannah. Am I not better to you than 10 sons? Perhaps in the innocence of love, he couldn't understand the depth of her suffering, but his genuine concern offered shelter and provision, even if he couldn't grasp the mystery hidden in her heart. This shows how often even our closest ones can't really reach the depth of another's pain or longing, and so Hannah's loneliness deepened. Year after year, her trips to Shiloh became more intense. At the feast, when everyone celebrated, ate, sang, and danced, Hannah separated herself and sought the silent space of the temple. There, before the altar, she whispered desperate words of surrender. Her prayer wasn't loud, but overflowed with truth and perseverance. Hannah made a solemn vow. If God would grant her a son, she would give him back to the Lord for life, and a razor would never touch his head, a mark of special dedication, a life separated from birth. This moment of radical surrender is a milestone in all biblical history. It's not a bargain, but absolute trust. Hannah recognizes that a true blessing only makes sense if returned to the giver. By promising Samuel, still unconceived, Hannah shows that the greater miracle is not simply to receive, but to learn to give back, to place the dream in the hands of the God who can transform all things. The priest Eli, initially suspicious, notices her persistence. Realizing her genuine plea, he blesses her again, prophesying that Israel's God would grant her heartfelt request. The narrative intensifies as the answer arrives. Hannah conceives, and Samuel is born, asked of the Lord. The whole family's life changes. Days once filled with weeping now fill with gratitude. The child's birth is celebrated with songs, and Hannah, faithful to her vow, chooses not to go yearly to Shiloh until Samuel is weaned and old enough to be given entirely to God's service. It was a season of joy, but also of preparing her heart to let go. For Hannah understood that promises only make sense if carried through to the end. During Samuel's first years, Hannah didn't neglect his spiritual upbringing. Every act of affection, every story told, each prayer whispered over his crib reinforced the reality of a God who hears and answers prayer. Hannah knew humans are shaped from childhood, so she prepared Samuel not for her preferences, but for the supreme purpose of serving the Lord. Weaning in that culture happened around the age of 3, and Hannah, seeing the time approach, surely felt both joy at the fulfillment and the pain of surrender. When the day came, Hannah took Samuel, prepared a generous offering, a bull, flour, wine, and went up to Shiloh with Elkanah. The giving was dignified. Hannah introduced the boy to the priest and testified publicly to her fulfilled vow. She said, "For this child I prayed, and now I give him back to the Lord. For all his life he will be given to the Lord." Thus, Hannah not only saw her dream realized, but founded a new lineage of surrender, starting a sequence of spiritual transformation in Israel. Giving Samuel to Eli, Hannah experienced not only the fulfillment of a promise, but an inner liberation. Scripture highlights the consecration, but also records Hannah's song, a poetic prayer full of praise to the God who raises up the humble and brings down the proud, who makes the barren woman bear children and impoverishes the rich. Her words echo through generations as one of the Bible's most beautiful examples of faith, humility, and perseverance. Line by line, Hannah's song reveals what it means to have a prayer not only answered but turned into praise. She shows that persistent hope leads not to the celebration of a personal miracle, but to the glory of God, who hears the lowly, sustains the weary, and makes new beginnings possible even in the harshest ground. The true miracle in Hannah's story is not just Samuel's birth, but how she turned pain into faith, absence into hope, and dream into surrender. In a culture of immediacy, where waiting often feels like a sentence, Hannah invites us to know the God who works in silence, who acts contrary to merit, and who honors broken hearts. What dream or promise do you sense you need to place back into God's hands, trusting His faithfulness? Share your inspiration in the comments. We want to pray and give thanks with you for every story of surrender, faith, and new beginnings. When Hannah's story reaches its climax, emotion overflows from every line of the sacred text, drawing in anyone who contemplates her journey with an attentive heart. The silent tears and prayers of the past become a public song of joy, hope, and deep reverence to the God who, in His mercy, turns mourning into dancing and brings the unlikely into the center stage. The setting is the giving of Samuel, that much longed-for son, to the temple in Shiloh. In Hannah's eyes, we see a mix of longing and contentment. In her gestures, no hesitation or rebellion, but the rare maturity of someone who understood that everything received from the Lord's hands must be ready to be given back to Him for eternal glory. Before their decisive parting, Hannah enjoyed precious days with her little boy. She educated him at home amidst simple tasks, whispered prayers, and stories about the God who parted the sea, rained down manna, and so many times performed wonders for His people. She taught Samuel to recognize the Lord's voice even in dreams, to distinguish the murmurs of the world from God's personal call, even to the lowliest. Their maternal bond overflowed with affection, never possession. Hannah knew by experience that true love guides, encourages, and sets free rather than holds on tight. On the trip to Shiloh, Hannah took not only Samuel, dressed in the little robe she had sewn in prayer, but also a generous offering and a heart ready to praise. Entering the temple with her husband Elkanah and the priest Eli, she fulfilled her word without complaint. Imagine that goodbye, the mother bowing at the altar, her voice breaking as she prayed, not in desperation but in gratitude and celebration. Scripture does not hide the weight of this moment. The hardest part was not waiting for the miracle, but letting it go for a greater purpose. In her song, known by many as the Magnificat of the Old Testament, Hannah proclaims eternal truths. The Lord brings death and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and raises up. The Lord sends poverty and wealth. He humbles and he exalts. He lifts the poor from the dust and seats them with princes. 1 Samuel 2, 6, 8. These are not mere words. They are the living confession of a transformed soul. Hannah does not only thank God for her son, but exalts divine justice, the sovereignty beyond human reach, and the compassion that turns toward the invisible. She celebrates not just the miracle received, but the character of the miracle maker, recognizing that all is gift and nothing can compare to the fullness of the living God. At the heart of this climax rests a powerful lesson about surrender and worship. Worship born from the depths of despair, rising into sincere thanksgiving, is a precious offering to God. Through her story, Hannah challenges us to break away from utilitarian faith, where seeking is only to receive, and reveals the pathway to mature faith. Disinterested gratitude, songs in the desert, willingness to give, even when it would be easier to keep. This is one of the Bible's most beautiful reversals. A once-forgotten woman preaches hope through her example and through her words. The deeper promise is manifest in the details. Every year, Hannah sewed a new little robe for Samuel and brought it to Shiloh, renewing the bond of prayer and surrender. Every stitch was filled with longing, but also trust. Samuel grew up in the temple, learning from Eli, and grew increasingly sensitive to revelation, eventually being recognized as one of Israel's great prophets. Meanwhile, Hannah was blessed by God with other children, reaping unexpected joy and learning that no sincere sacrifice before God goes unrewarded. At this point in the narrative, it seems all pain has been transformed into joy, every past silence replaced by songs of praise. It's a victory born of letting go, not of achievement, of giving the best, not keeping it for ourselves. Hannah proves that faith's highest climax is not accumulation, but radical trust, preferring to depend on God rather than results or visible rewards. Ask yourself, what is God asking you to lay down? What blessings, projects, or people are in your hands needing to be placed back on the altar? Can you turn your desperate prayers into praise, even before the answer comes? Hannah's climax challenges us to break cycles of possession and control, exchanging them for worship, gratitude, and surrender. Tell us how you have experienced the joy of surrendering something precious to God. A dream, a person, a project, or even a pain. Share your story in the comments, and let's praise God's faithfulness together in all of life's climaxes and new beginnings. As Hannah's story draws toward its conclusion, an atmosphere of reverence and maturity fills the scene. Giving the boy Samuel to the temple was not only a personal milestone, but also a turning point for Israel's entire history. From that moment on, Hannah's daily life was transformed by hope, the memory of her miracle, and a faith that deepened more each year. The focus shifted from anxious waiting to constant celebration of God's faithfulness and recognizing His purpose in every unfolding event. Visiting Samuel year after year at Shiloh, bringing hand-sewn robes woven with prayer, Hannah was reminded that her motherhood went beyond natural bonds. She had birthed an instrument of God for a whole generation. Her attitude broke the cycle of rivalry, hurt, and resentment that once defined her home. The silence of her hardest days, once transformed into a hymn of praise, began to echo among Israel's families as a living testimony that sincere prayer is the seed of transformation for both community and posterity. Samuel grew up in the temple under Eli's guidance, bearing his mother's spiritual legacy, but also discovering a unique, personal calling that surpassed even her greatest dreams. Hannah had to learn that every true act of surrender means trusting God's work, even when we can no longer intervene or control the outcome. Samuel's maturity illustrates that a parent's prayers can mark an entire generation, but each person's walk of faith is shaped by personal choices before the call of God Most High. Scripture emphasizes that after Samuel's birth, God gave Hannah more children. Her barrenness was left behind, replaced by a season of unimagined abundance during her deepest tears. It wasn't a reward in a transactional sense, but an expression of generosity from a God who delights in surprising, completing, and blessing beyond human prediction. Hannah's story breaks the merit cycle to reveal the secrets of grace. It's not about how much we cry, ask, or fast, but about a God who sees the heart and honors sincerity. Hannah's life, as a mother of many, became a reference for women and men through the ages. Her story was retold under tents and along the roads to Jerusalem, and it consoled those carrying long weights, inspired those facing contempt, and encouraged mothers, fathers, and dreamers waiting for children, projects, or new beginnings. From her journey, we learn that vulnerability does not diminish us before God. Rather, those who open up at the altar, acknowledging weakness and laying everything at the Lord's feet, discover the peace and strength of having lost the fear of the future, because their trust is in a God who cares for every hair, every tear, every detail. The priest Eli, too, was changed by Hannah's example. He learned to look beyond appearances, welcome the brokenhearted, and discern God's voice beyond social forms. Temple service, often carried out by habit, gained new freshness in light of a faith that insisted on waiting, praising, and listening. Eli's own sons, who did not follow Samuel's path, sharply contrast with the boy Hannah gave, showing that spiritual environment, however well structured, depends more on sensitive hearts than formal protocols. Over time, Samuel became the last judge and the first major prophet of Israel, anointing kings, confronting leaders, and reviving a whole nation's faith. The mother who once cried alone is remembered as the starting point of a new era. Hannah is forever the woman who, against all odds, still believed. The resounding message of Hannah's story isn't simply that God answers prayers, but that He knows how to turn every situation, however limited, into the start of a silent revolution. The secret is persistence, honesty, and radical surrender. Perhaps you, like Hannah, now walk in a post-miracle season, seeking meaning and continuity, celebrating victories, yet still anticipating new fruits and purpose. Ask yourself, does your joy depend only on visible answers? Or is it anchored in trusting God's care in the invisible? Can you celebrate processes, outcomes, and transformations that are beyond your control or understanding? Hannah's legacy invites us never to underestimate the power of everyday faithfulness and quietly renewed surrender. How has your journey of prayer, waiting, and surrender already impacted or could impact others in your life? Share your experience or desire to intercede, bless, and inspire. Your story could be a tool of hope in someone's life. Hannah's life, marked by perseverance and absolute surrender to God, offers lessons that deeply resonate in contemporary spirituality. She was not a powerful or influential woman in her time. She was an ordinary woman, facing the silent pain of infertility and social pressure. Yet her strength lay in unwavering faith and the courage to lay before the Lord what hurt her most, without masks, without pretense. Today, in a world that often values appearance and quick success, Hannah challenges us to maintain a space for deep sincerity and prayer, even when answers delay, even when the silence seems harsh. The challenge Hannah faced is universal and timeless. Painful waiting, feelings of abandonment, confrontation with personal limits. Many today walk this same journey, coping with loss, unmet dreams, and frustrated expectations, perhaps including you, watching now. Hannah does not hide that her prayer came from the depths of her soul, a place only those who truly surrender reach. It is in this difficult and lonely place that God seeks hearts ready for extraordinary new beginnings. We know perseverance in prayer is not easy, but Hannah's story powerfully reminds us that nothing is impossible for those who keep faith. Additionally, Hannah's act of dedication reveals another vital aspect of genuine spiritual life, the ability to relinquish in due time. Her decision to dedicate Samuel to the Lord's service was a radical act of trust, a commitment that went beyond natural maternal affection to a greater purpose. This surrender directly invites us. What are we willing to entrust to God's will even when it hurts? What parts of our lives need consecration rather than retention? This renunciation does not diminish blessings, but expands them, generating transformation not only for the giver, but for the whole community around. In modern culture, we often wrestle with answered prayer. We want miracles on tight schedules and immediate solutions. But Hannah teaches that faith is not bound by human timetables and that God acts according to eternal purposes. Her persistent prayer, made amid the silence of great religious gatherings, shows that God hears the secret place and answers those seeking Him with pure and continual hearts. The impact of her attitude is far beyond Samuel's birth. It marks the dawn of a whole new spiritual era, born from expectation sustained by trust. Samuel's growth in the temple following Hannah's dedication also brings profound reflection on education, faith, and family environment. Hannah knew that praying and making vows was important, but preparing Samuel for God's call required patience, fervor, and daily care. This calls us to take active roles in shaping the spirituality of new generations, understanding that not only the moment of dedication, but the entire journey of those called by God matters. Her story models for parents, educators, and Christian communities seeking to reflect light and produce lasting fruit. What stories of faith, struggle, and surrender do you know or live today? Like Hannah, may we learn to rise from silence, renew hope, and offer all we are so God may do the extraordinary in our lives. May every prayer be sown with courage and watered with trust so miracles keep happening. Share in the comments a time when your persevering prayer transformed your life or someone you know. Let's form a chain of faith and encouragement in this community. As we follow Hannah's journey, we see that her story is not a conclusion, but a continuous invitation to deep, transformative spirituality. Hannah shows that true faith is not made only of great deeds, but of silent moments of surrender, of pleas uttered in silence, and renewed trust even when answers seem distant. Her persevering prayer proves that it is possible to keep the heart open over time, even amid harshest difficulties, and that God values sincerity and vulnerability more than eloquent words or grand gestures. Our vocation today, inspired by Hannah, is to seek a relationship beyond the superficial, one where the soul can pour out its fears, pain, and deepest dreams before the Lord. It is to accept that prayer is an ongoing dialogue, sometimes marked by silence, sometimes by tears, others by joy, but always by a heart willing to open and listen. Hannah invites us to break the cycle of fear of being unheard, showing that persistence and humility are paths for our voices to reach the throne of grace and receive answers that transform beyond expectation. In a culture marked by speed and immediacy, Hannah's story challenges us to build patience and expectancy in our walk with God, valuing God's timing over our own. As a mother, she not only prayed, but prepared an emotional and spiritual environment for Samuel to fulfill his call. This reminds us that prayer must be accompanied by conscious actions that foster spiritual growth in the home, church, and community. It is a statement that faith is not passive waiting, but active practice, a daily construction of trust and surrender. Hannah's path also suggests that the true miracle is not confined to the singular act of receiving, but extends to the faithfulness of letting go. To love, pray, and then release, to invest, care, and then allow God to do what only He can. Her testimony reinforces that intimacy with God is built both in pain and joy, in life's ups and downs, in unshakable perseverance and radical surrender of all we have, are, and desire. In our current world, where many feel discouraged by unanswered prayers, Hannah's example is a beacon. She reminds that God's promises unfold in due time, and that faithfulness in prayer keeps us aligned with divine purpose, even when all seems silent. Hannah teaches that regardless of difficulty, there is power in patient surrender, and there is transformation beyond waiting. What area of your life is crying out today for patient, persevering prayer? Share your story or prayer request in the comments. Let's walk this faith and hope journey together, impacting lives inspired by Hannah. In Hannah's story, one emblematic chapter is her dialogue with the priest Eli, which reveals much about human perception and divine care. Hannah, still inside the sacred grounds of Shiloh, prayed with a fervent sincerity that transcended audible words, a plea from her heart heard only by the Lord. Eli, clearly perplexed, watched and wrongly judged her, believing her anguish was from excessive distress or drunkenness. This passage illustrates a reality present in many religious contexts, where surface appearances can lead us to misjudge those honestly seeking God. When confronted, Hannah did not falter, but explained her heart's cry. It was the anguish of a suffering soul pleading for a miracle. Her humility and honesty won the priest's sympathy, and he blessed her, recognizing the power of prayer from a broken heart. This moment is emblematic for the Christian tradition, showing that God values inner truth over empty rituals, and that every sincere prayer, even amid crisis, is a revelation of saving faith. This part of the narrative invites self-awareness and tolerance within faith communities. How often do we judge prayers, fasts, or behaviors by surface appearances without seeing the depth of vows and struggles behind them? Hannah challenges us to develop a more sensitive gaze, deeper listening, and a more welcoming attitude toward diverse expressions of faith and pain. Such openness is essential to build communities where love, support, and confidentiality matter more than accusations and prejudice. Eli's blessing of Hannah, though brief in Scripture, signals a genuine response from God, an encouragement to keep faith alive even without immediate signs. This is a key point in her story. Persevering prayer builds a time that will be abundantly answered at the right moment. Constancy and hope amid adversity become tools each believer can weave into their life regardless of time or circumstance. The relationship between Hannah and Samuel is also a precious example of the positive influence faith and maternal dedication exert on new generations. Her involvement with the boy, from before birth to his formal dedication at the temple, shows commitment beyond physical care. It reflects spiritual formation, prayer, and walking alongside divine calling's demands. This narrative inspires all families who wish to raise children rooted in love, faith, and divine purpose. What is Hannah's secret of perseverance? Complete trust in a God who never fails, answers in his own time, and honors vows made sincerely. Courage to go year after year to the temple, even under stares and whispers, even when hope seems to fade. And total surrender, ready to offer the greatest gift when it arrives, knowing the true miracle lies in fidelity to vows and willingness to return to the hands of the Most High. Reflecting on this moment invites us to ask, how do we respond to misunderstandings? How do we receive faith that is not our own, the silent cry of a brother or sister in struggle? Hannah, with her silent prayer and open heart, invites us into love, listening, and respect, for it is in these places that God continues to work mightily, even today. Have you ever been misunderstood for your faith or prayer? How do you find strength to persevere? Share in the comments. This is a community of support where listening ears and open hearts await you. What extraordinary strength dwells in the heart of those who learn to pray with Hannah's persistence and faith. Her story crosses millennia as a beacon for those who bear the weight of waiting, pain, and doubt, and for all who desire to find a model of total surrender before the God who sees the unseen and acts at the appointed time. Hannah's life was not marked by easy counsel or instant answers. On the contrary, she faced the loneliness of silence, the burden of provocation, and the harshness of human misunderstanding, yet remained firm, learning that true prayer is a bridge to inner transformation and to the fulfillment of God's purposes. When we think of prayer, many imagine eloquent words, comfortable moments, and ready certainties. Hannah teaches us otherwise. She prayed with a vulnerable heart, unafraid to shed tears, without masks, almost without voice. This is the prayer God honors, one born from deep within, often inaudible to others, but strong enough to touch the heavens. Her perseverance reminds us that faith is not a quick sprint, but a journey demanding patience, endurance, and unwavering trust, even when the path is invisible to human eyes. Hannah's example points us to a spirituality that embraces seasons of silence and the mystery of delay. She did not give up because she lacked immediacy. Her waiting was a sign of living hope and deepening love for God. Today, in a world marked by instant gratification, inheriting this patience and commitment is essential for those desiring a deep, mature faith. Ask yourself, how do we nurture our waiting? Do we have courage to remain in prayer when nothing seems to move? Furthermore, Hannah's absolute dedication in fulfilling her vow by giving Samuel to the temple service fascinates us for its courage and trust. She renounced her own motherly love, trusting that God would care for the child he had given her. This challenges our individualistic culture, which values having and possessing rather than giving and serving. Hannah teaches that the greatest investment we can make is for God's glory, even if it requires sacrifice and letting go. This maternal surrender also reinforces that true leadership often arises from unseen sacrifices made with an available heart. Samuel would grow to be a spiritual giant, anointer of kings and reformer of the people, but without his mother's faithful example and steady steps, his mission would have been very different. For parents, guardians, or faith community leaders, her story is an invitation to constant prayer and trust in God's invisible work in every life. Reflecting on Hannah, we see that her legacy is not just the narrative of a miracle, but a call to a life marked by perseverance, surrender, and faith. It is a call to be people who pray, wait, and offer, all while trusting that God acts even in silence and that his faithfulness surpasses all human circumstance. Are you in a season of waiting or struggle in your life? Why not share in the comments what you've been praying about and learning? We want to be a faith community, praying with you and celebrating God's faithfulness every step of the way. As we close this cycle dedicated to the life of Hannah, mother of the prophet Samuel, we are invited to reflect on the power of persevering prayer and total surrender. Hannah's story is not just an ancient account, but a living example for all who face difficult waits, feel alone in their struggles, or wish to strengthen their faith amid adversity. She shows us that a sincere heart, silently crying yet steadfast, is heard by God, and that full surrender brings transformation, not only personal, but for an entire generation. Hannah inspires us to cultivate a spirituality that does not depend on appearances, immediate results, or human approval. Her quiet but firm prayer reminds us of the essence of authentic faith, which loves, waits, and persists through the unknown. By dedicating Samuel to the Lord, Hannah taught that blessing also requires responsibility, that commitment demands trust, and that the greatest miracles emerge from faithful obedience to God's call. Her journey remains an invitation for each of us today to turn pain into prayer, waiting into surrender, and life into testimony. Through Hannah, we learn that God honors a willing heart, a soul that does not give up, and a spirit that knows how to wait. Even when answers delay, He works faithfully, preparing paths, illuminating choices, and renewing strength. May we, like Hannah, open ourselves to this divine presence, allow our story to be written by the Creator's hand, and make our faith a source of hope for others. We at Bible in Colors are immensely grateful for your company on this long and rich journey. In upcoming episodes, we will continue exploring characters and stories that vividly reveal God's love and power throughout human history. Soon, we will delve into the legacy of King Solomon, Hannah's son, whose life brings profound lessons about wisdom, glory, and the dangers of idolatry. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone in need of renewed hope. Share in the comments which lesson from Hannah's life touched your heart deeply and strengthened your faith. We walk this journey together.